Have you ever had one difficult thought, and within moments, that thought seemed to become the truth about your entire life? Perhaps the thought was, I'm not good enough, I have failed, they do not respect me, or something is going to go wrong. And at first, it was only a thought, a movement within the mind. But then something happened. You did not simply notice the thought, you became the thought. The body responded to it. Your emotions gathered around it. Your attention searched for evidence to support it. And for the time, for the while, the thought became the world through which you were living. This is the condition Patanjali describes in Yoga Sutra 1.4. In Sutra 1.2, he tells us, Yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the stilling. Yoga is the stilling of the movements of the mind. In Sutra 1.3, he explains what happens when those movements settle. Tada drastu swarupe avasthanam. Then the seer rests in its own true nature. Now, in Sutra 1.4, he explains what happens during other times. And the sutra is Vṛtti-sārūpyam Itaratra. Let's say it slowly. Vṛtti-sārūpyam Itaratra. A simple translation. At other times, the seer identifies with the movements of the mind. Or at other times, we take the form of our mental modifications. This sutra describes one of the most ordinary and powerful sources of human suffering. We forget that a thought is something occurring within awareness, and we begin to experience the thought as who we are. Let's begin with the final word, Itarada. Itarada means at other times or otherwise. This word connects the sutra directly with what came before. When the movements of the mind settle, the seer rests in its true nature. At other times, identification occurs. Patanjali is describing two very different ways of living. In one, we recognize ourselves as the awareness in which experience appears. And in the other, we become absorbed in the experience itself. One moment, we may recognize anger is arising. In another, we are completely inside that anger. In one moment, we recognize, yeah, the mind is worrying. In another, the imagined future feels unquestionably real. One moment we see, yeah, this is an old pattern. In another, the pattern is speaking through us before we even realize it. This difference may seem subtle, but it changes. It changes how we relate to everything. The word vritti, the word vritti, it appeared in Sutra 1.2. It means a movement, a modification, a fluctuation, a pattern, or the wave within the mental field. A thought is a vritti, a memory is a vritti, an emotional reaction can become a vritti, an interpretation is a vritti, an image of the future is a vritti, a story about yourself is a vritti. The mind is continually taking different forms. Someone says something, and the mind, it forms an interpretation. A memory arises, and the mind takes the shape of the past. A fear appears, and the mind projects into an imagined future. The vritti itself is not necessarily the problem. The problem is what happens next. We forget that it is a movement. We believe that it is the whole reality. The central word in this sutra is Swarupyam. It may be understood as taking the same form or assuming the appearance of, or becoming identified with, or mistaking oneself for, or mistaking oneself for. The word suggests that awareness appears to take the shape of whatever is moving through the mind. Awareness appears to take the shape of whatever is moving through the mind. Imagine clear water is poured into different containers. Poured into a round vessel, the water appears round. Poured in a square vessel, it appears square. The water itself has not become permanently round or square. It has temporarily taken the shape of the container. In the same way, awareness seems to take the form of the mental movement. When fear is present, we do not merely experience fear. We say, I am afraid. And then perhaps we go on and say, I am a fearful person. When failure occurs, we do not merely recognize this attempt did not work. We say, I am a failure. When someone rejects, we may move from this person did not choose me to I am unwanted. An event becomes a thought. The thought becomes a story. And the story becomes an identity. This is Sarupya. Now, how does this identification happen? An identification happens, it often happens so quickly that we do not see the stages. Let's take a simple example. You send someone a message and they do not reply. The event itself is neutral. A message was sent, a reply has not yet arrived. But then a vritti arises. They are ignoring me. Another vritti follows. They must be upset. And then another one. I have done something wrong. This always happens to me. No one values me. So many vrittis arising. And then within a short time, an unanswered message has become a complete story about your worth. And then the body responds as though that story is true. The chest tightens, the stomach contracts, the breath becomes shallow. You may send another message, you may withdraw, you may become defensive, you may react to the other person before knowing what has actually happened. And then later, you discover that their phone was off. But the suffering you experienced was real. The event was simple. The event was very simple. The identification, it created the world around it. We do not see reality directly. We do not see reality directly. Yoga Sutra 1.4 challenges a very common assumption. We often believe that we see reality exactly as it is. That's what we often believe, that we see reality exactly as it is. But much of the time, most of the time, we are seeing reality through the movements of the mind. Two people can experience the same event very differently. One person receives constructive feedback and thinks, this may help me improve. Another person receives the same feedback and thinks, I am being attacked. The external event is similar. The inner vritti is different. One person does not greet us warmly. One mind may say, they must be tired. Another says, they do not like me. A plan changes. One person experiences inconvenience. Another person experiences rejection. This does not mean that everything is imaginary or that external circumstances do not matter. It means that experience is shaped by interpretation. Experience is shaped by interpretation. We are rarely responding only to what happened. We are also responding to what the mind says the event means. Think again of the mind as a lens. A lens. If the lens is colored, if the lens is colored red, everything appears red. If the mind is colored by fear, neutral situations, they may appear threatening. If the mind is colored by rejection, distance may appear personal. If the mind is colored by shame, correction may feel like condemnation. If the mind is colored by resentment, even kindness may be treated with suspicion. The world we experience is partly shaped by the lens through which we see it. But because we are looking through the lens, we often do not notice the lens itself. We say things like, that person is dangerous. This situation is hopeless. I cannot do it. This is who I am. Yoga invites us to pause, to ask, is this reality itself? Or is this a form the mind has taken? Is this reality itself, or is this a form the mind has taken? That question, it does not mean dismissing our experience. It means creating enough space to examine it. Now, we may assume that identification happens only with painful thoughts, but we can also identify with pleasant experiences. Someone praises us and we think, I am successful. A project goes well and we think, I am finally worthy. A relationship makes us feel loved and we conclude, now I am complete. These experiences, they may feel good, but if our identity depends on them, fear soon follows. If I am successful because this project succeeded, what happens when the next one fails? If I am worthy because someone praises me, what happens when they criticize me? If I am complete because a person loves me, what happens if they leave? Identification with pleasant vrittis can create attachment. We cling to the form because we believe the form tells us who we are. Yoga does not ask us to reject success, love, joy, or praise. It asks us not to build our entire identity upon experiences that are naturally changing. This sutra, it also helps us understand emotional triggers. A present event may awaken an old mental pattern. Someone interrupts us. The present event is small, but the mind connects it to earlier experiences of being dismissed. The mind connects it to earlier experiences of being dismissed. And suddenly the reaction is much larger than the moment. Someone becomes quiet during a disagreement. The silence may be temporary, but if the mind associates the silence with abandonment, the body reacts as though abandonment is happening again. The present moment becomes covered by the past. We are no longer responding only to what is here. We are responding to a vritti that's shaped by memory. And this is why awareness is so important. Without awareness, the pattern, it becomes our reality. But with awareness, we may recognize this reaction belongs partly to the present and partly to something older. That recognition, it does not instantly remove the reaction, but it allows us to relate to it differently. The difference between thought and truth. A thought can feel true without being completely true. And this is one of the most important lessons of Sutra 1.4. The mind may say, I cannot cope. But perhaps what is true is, this moment feels difficult. The mind may say everything is falling apart. But perhaps what is true is, one part of my life is feeling uncertain. The mind may say no one cares. But perhaps the truth is, I am feeling disconnected right now. The mind may say I always fail. But probably what is true is that the attempt did not work as I hoped. Yoga does not replace every negative thought with a positive slogan. It asks us to see more accurately. The shift is not from negative thinking to forced positivity. It is from unconscious identification to clear observation. Unconscious identification to clear observation. Let's take a let's take a relevant example. Imagine you make a mistake at work. Perhaps you sent the wrong information, or you miss a deadline, or you forget an important detail. Now the event is real. Something needs to be corrected. But almost immediately the mind may create a larger identity. I am incompetent. I always make mistakes. They will lose confidence in me. My career is going nowhere. The original mistake may require one email, one correction, or one conversation. But identification, it can create hours of shame, it can create fear, self criticism. Now imagine a completely different response where you pause, you feel discomfort in the body, you acknowledge a mistake has, you notice the thought, I am incompetent, and then you recognize this is a thought that's arising in response to the mistake. You still take responsibility. You still correct what needs to be corrected, but you do not turn the event into a definition of your whole being. That is the movement from identification toward awareness. The observer does not remove responsibility. There's an important caution here. Recognizing that a thought is a vritti does not mean avoiding responsibility. We cannot use spiritual language to dismiss the effects of our behavior. If we hurt someone, it is not enough to say this is only their mental modification. If we make a mistake, we still need to address it. If a situation is genuinely unsafe, we still need to respond. Awareness does not make us passive. It allows us to respond more accurately. When we are when we are not lost in shame, we can apologize more honestly. When we are not overwhelmed by defensiveness, we can listen more clearly. When we are not trapped in fear, we can make wiser decisions. This identification is not avoidance. It is the space that makes conscious responsibility possible. One practical way to notice identification is through language. Listen for statements beginning with I am. Listen for statements beginning with I am. I am anxious. I am angry. I am broken. I am unwanted. I am a failure. Listen for statements beginning with I am. Sometimes we are simply using ordinary language. But sometimes the language reveals that an experience has become an identity. Sometimes the language reveals that an experience has become an identity. Try changing the statement slightly. Instead of I am anxious, say anxiety is present. Instead of I am angry, say anger is moving through. Instead of I am a failure, you can say a thought of failure has arisen. Instead of I am broken, you can say I am experiencing pain. This is not just wordplay. What this does is it creates a small space between awareness and experience. The feeling is still there, but it is no longer the whole of who you are. It is no longer the whole of who you are. Here's a simple practice inspired by Yoga Sutra 1.4. When a strong thought or an emotion arises today, pause and use three steps. Firstly, name the movement. Worry is present, judgment is present, anger is present, comparison is present. Name the movement. Second, notice the story. Notice the story. What is the mind saying this experience means? They do not value me, I am going to fail, or I should be further ahead. Notice the story. Third, separate the experience from the identity. Simply say, this is a movement in the mind. It is not the whole of me. This is a movement of the mind. It is not the whole of me. You do not need to argue with the thought. You do not need to eliminate it. Simply see it. Simply see it as a movement rather than as a complete identity. That moment of seeing, that is already yoga. You may wish to sit with these questions. You may wish to sit with these questions. Which thought or emotional pattern do I most often mistake for who I am? Which thought or emotional pattern do I most often mistake for who I am? Is it I am not enough, I am alone, I must be in control, I am responsible for everyone, I cannot trust people, or I will always be this way? Which thought or emotional pattern is most often, or do you most often mistake for who I am? And and taking that further, what becomes possible when you see this as a mental pattern rather than an absolute truth? What becomes possible when you see this as a mental pattern rather than an absolute truth? Perhaps the pattern has been present for many years. Perhaps it has shaped important choices. You do not have to condemn yourself for identifying with it. Identification is the very ordinary condition that Patanjali is describing. The practice begins when we notice. The practice begins when we notice. There's compassion in this sutra. There's compassion in this sutra. This sutra, 1.4, it is not a criticism of the mind. Patanjali is not telling us that we are foolish for becoming identified. He is describing how consciousness ordinarily functions when awareness is obscured. We become our thoughts because the thoughts feel immediate. We become our emotions because the body feels them intensely. We become our stories because we have repeated them for so many years. The purpose of this sutra is not to create shame, it is simply to create recognition. Once a pattern has been seen, once a pattern can be seen, it no longer operates in exactly the same way. There is now a witness, there is now a pause, and there is now another possibility. Yoga Sutra 1.4, Vṛtti-sārūpyam Itaratra. Vṛtti-sārūpyam Itaratra. At other times, the seer identifies with the movements of the mind. A thought arises, and we become the thought. An emotion arises, an emotion appears, and we build an identity around it. A story repeats, and we begin to see the whole world through that story. The practice is not to eliminate every thought, it is simply to recognize this is a movement of the mind. It is not the whole of me. This is a movement of the mind. It is not the whole of. As you move through your day, as you move through your week, notice one moment of identification. Name the movement. Notice the story. Create a little space between the experience and who you are. In the next episode, we move to the next sutra, Yoga Sutra 1.5, where Patanjali begins to classify the different kinds of mental movements and explains that they may be painful or non painful. Thank you for listening. Namaste.